bölümde satın alma pratiklerini konuşacağız. Ben hiç vakit kaybetmeden değerli konukları sahneye davet edeceğim. Bu bölümde moderatörümüz IAF Genel Sekreteri Sayın Matthijs Crietee olacak. O moderasyonu gerçekleştirecek. Aynı zamanda Better Buying'den başkan ve kurucu ortağı Marsha Dickson bizlerle olacak. Yine Chainge Capital Yönetim Kurulu Başkanı Thorbeck online bir şekilde konferansımıza bağlanmış olacak ve Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production Avrupa temsilcisi Gerwin Leppink de yine bu bölümde bizim konuklarımız. Ben değerli katılımcıları sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Please. You can come. Mr. Crietee.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in our session on purchasing practices. Now, in a day like this, when we're talking about a green revolution, we cannot really do that without talking about the topic of purchasing practices. And I will explain why in a minute, but first I will really briefly introduce the panelists to you. They will say something more later on in this session. But to my left, there is Marsha Dickson, the CEO of Better Buying. And we have Gerwin Leppink, who is the EU representative for REP compliance. And from the US, on the screen, but I'm not seeing him now, maybe he can hear me, but we will be seeing him because we have fantastic technicians working on it. There is John Thorbeck, the chairman of Chainge Capital. So let me briefly introduce this session and explain why we think this is so important. We hear today the list of demands from brands and retailers buying from manufacturers on sustainability and on flexibility growing steadily. And at the same time, we know margins for manufacturers are being squeezed by rising costs. And it becomes clearer every day that without better ways of buying, better purchasing practices, manufacturers cannot realistically be expected to, by themselves, create a greener industry. It's a collaboration, as we said before. The tide is changing. Most of the business is understanding this, but understanding does not lead automatically to actions. So in this session, we are looking at different ways, different concrete roads for making sure that purchasing practices will actually be improved and that there is room for those investments in sustainability that are needed. And the organization that I represent, the IAF, is very much involved in this topic. Most of our efforts are channeled through a project called the Sustainable Terms of Trade Initiative. This is a 13-association, 10-country initiative led by manufacturing associations, including TGSD, from across the world, and together they represent about 75% of global production. So this is really a global effort going on, looking at the topic of purchasing practices, and some of our speakers here are also directly or indirectly involved in this initiative. Right. I think I was planning to start with John Thorbeck, but I can't see him on the screen yet, so if somebody from the technical side can give me a cue when he is there, then I will know, but I will start now with my neighbor on the left, and I need this little apparatus to go to the next slide. we can call it a clicker. It could be there.
The last speaker.
It's gone.
It went to break.
Well, that's a challenge for the moderator. I cannot get up and look for it. Anyway, let me introduce the question I'm going to ask Marsha, and then I think we'll have covered. Yeah, I think that's it. I think Gerwin found it. There you go.
Yay.
And please put on the slides for Marsha Dickson. Well, Marsha, starting with you. You're a pioneer in the field of purchasing practices in the garment industry. And actually with Better Buying, you have the world's main system that allows manufacturers to rate their clients' purchasing practices and to do that anonymously. Can you explain much better than I just did and in much more detail how this measuring and reporting serves to improve purchasing practices?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me here. And because I'm a retired professor, we're going to stick really close to notes, because otherwise I will speak for 3.5 or 4 hours. So, because I can tell you so much about this. I started studying the impact of purchasing practices on suppliers and workers 20 years ago. And we created Better Buying out of the research I was doing as a professor at the University of Delaware. And before I talk to you about what is better buying, I want to ask you 3 questions. And these aren't questions that you have to raise your hand to answer or shout out an answer. Just think about what your answer is. The first question is, how many of you are frequently in trouble with your customers? Maybe because your workers are working too much overtime. They're concerned about whether you've subcontracted to an unauthorized facility. Or other things related to compliance to their code of conduct. So I already see hands. You don't have to do that, though. So how many of you could point to things that the customer did that contributed to that issue? You know, for example, not giving enough lead time, not giving you detailed forecasts about the orders that they were expecting to give you, and maybe not paying for everything they asked for. So the third question is then, how many of you have shared with your customer what they need to do differently to prevent those problems? And if you haven't, why not? So this is why Better Buying was started. It was because we know that the poor purchasing practices of brand and retailer customers play a large part in whether you're able to comply to their code of conduct, whether you're able to improve your environmental performance, and even whether you're able to survive as a business. And we created a digital safe space for suppliers to share what happens in their business relationships with specific buyer customers and share their ideas about improvements that could be made and have their concerns taken more seriously and acted on. And a lot of your customers are probably asking you for something called worker voice when they talk about factory audits. We're providing a mechanism for supplier voice, for your voice, because it's been neglected too long in this industry. And so what we do is, with the data that we gather, we advance your concerns, advance your issues to your particular customers, but also to the industry at large. We protect your anonymity the whole time. We never name the suppliers that participate, and we never give access to the raw data that would be used to identify you. So we have 2 surveys that we use to provide important information about purchasing practices. Our flagship survey is called the Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index, and I think we ran it for the 6th time this spring. It has about 50 questions that ask about the business relationship with real business data. So you have to go into your books and answer questions about forecasting, about payment, and things like that. And from this data, we develop reports for companies that subscribe with us that share, where they are against benchmarks and recommendations for how to improve. And we also take all the data that's submitted from suppliers around the world and put it together in reports that we do for industry that you can find on our website. And so as a result, Better Buying has really brought a lot of attention to the challenges you face as a result of your customers' purchasing practices. And we've gotten traction among companies that are really serious about improving their practices and really serious about improving their business relationship with you so that together you can achieve all the sustainability goals we've been talking about today. So another tool that we have, another survey launched just last year, and that's the Better Buying Partnership Index. And it's a short set of questions that ask for your perception of the business relationship and purchasing practices. It's really simple to fill out. It's really popular because of that. And it gives a different understanding of the quality of the relationship and points to areas where brands and retailers can improve, and even areas where they might be doing good enough. And so both of these surveys come together and provide data that aligns with Better Buying's 5 principles of responsible purchasing, which is setting out guidance to companies about where they need to go. And that is to provide suppliers with enough visibility so that you can plan your production, to provide enough time for all processes, to provide fair financial arrangements, to give you stable production around the year, and to take their role in as a shared responsibility to achieving sustainability. So I'm going to really quickly share that our subscribers are improving their purchasing practices. And this is a chart from our index report last year that compared pre-COVID with COVID data, year-over-year comparison. And we saw increases, improvements in planning and forecasting, cost and cost negotiation, and win-win sustainable partnership. And we could perhaps talk more about improvements later in this session. But here I want to share an image from our 2019 index report where we analyze the different ways that different countries and regions are being treated. Which countries were experiencing the better purchasing practices, and which countries and regions were experiencing worst purchasing practices. And if you can see, Turkey is in red, and it is not good to be in red, because this means suppliers participating in our survey reported purchasing practices that were worse than all those countries that are marked in green and yellow. You can find that 2019 report on our website, but regarding forecasting, for example, suppliers in Turkey reported the capacity was less often reserved in advance compared to like Taiwan. The forecasts were less frequently accurate within the 20% range compared to, for example, India and the other South Asian countries. So I wonder, if buyers can forecast better for suppliers in India and Taiwan, why can't they forecast better for you? Another was the volume of orders you ship to customers monthly. It's much more volatile here than in China, Korea, and really about every other region of the world. Wouldn't you enjoy more stable orders from your buyers across the year? And thinking about those questions I started with, related to excessive overtime, related to unauthorized subcontracting, poor wages, and things like that, would you say these forecasting and ordering practices are related to those problems? I'm going to stop now, but hopefully I'll get to say a few things later. But I do want to know you to know that our Better Buying Partnership Index is live right now. And so you can scan it and go to that survey. I know you want to listen to the other speakers, so don't do the survey right now, but grab that while you can and rate your customers for us so that we can have the most valid and reliable data possible. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Marsha. It's really interesting to see the differences between the country, and I have a theory forming in my head why Turkey could be scoring worse, but we'll talk about that later. It's something important to discuss as an industry. I want to ask you one follow-up question before we go to the other speakers, and that is, are you already seeing benefits for manufacturers from actually doing this measuring and reporting?
Yeah, well, I mean, if companies are improving, that's a benefit to you for sure, because we created our surveys after lots and lots of consultation with suppliers around the world about what were the most painful practices that buyers had that impacted not only their ability to provide good working conditions, but also the ability to have good business. So better purchasing practices isn't just about environmental sustainability or social sustainability. It's about just good business. But just back to that pre-COVID versus COVID data that we had, all of the buyers were reducing duplicative audits. That's a benefit to you. 60% were issuing more suppliers with accurate forecasts, accurate tech packs, and were paying more orders in full. And another half were providing suppliers with forecasts half a year out or more, and were pricing more orders to cover the cost of compliant production. We're paying more bulk order invoices on time, and we're adhering to deadlines in the T&A calendar. So, I mean, I think you have to agree that's all beneficial to suppliers who are raising their voice, bringing their concerns, and bringing their ideas to the table about how the customers can do better.
Thanks, Marsha. That's encouraging to hear first about a problem and then a solution already in sight. So I think we'll go to our next panelist. And again, I'm looking with suspense at the screen, but I don't think we'll have John online. I'll say a few words later about what he was going to say, but I will happily now turn to Gerwin.
Thank you.
And then, Gerwin, you represent RAP, which we'll hear a little bit more about. For sure, it's a certification organization. It's based in the US, but it's working globally. And you are yourself based in Germany. And with RAP, but also from a lot of experience that you have, you deal with this due diligence legislation. That was passed in Germany recently, and that's also being discussed in the EU. So the question is around legislation. We have purchasing practices. They could be improved. What role do you think legislation is going to play? Is it a game changer? Is legislation going to help manufacturers get purchasing practices improved?
Thank you, Matthijs. First of all, thank you very much for being here in Istanbul. Always fantastic to be in this city. Thanks to the TCMA. And I'm really happy to represent RAP here today. To give you a short answer, because I have some slides as well, and maybe I move to that chair if I can't see my slides. To give you a short answer, Matthijs, definitely yes. Legislation will be the new North Star in compliance. For three good reasons. First of all, it's law. It's hard law. It's German legislation. It's not like, for example, in the UK, the Modern Slavery Act, which is just a reporting act. So basically, if companies, retailers, brands in the UK publish on their website a statement, that's covering pretty much what they need to do. In Germany, there will be an authority you have to report to. They will monitor, and they will see what companies, retailers, and brands in Germany are doing. So that's quite different. And the third point, which is very interesting, not only people working in this supply chain can report if something is not okay. Also trade unions, NGOs, can, in own capacity, if they have substantial knowledge about an issue in the supply chain, can report to authorities. If they don't act or react, they even can sue the government in their own capacity. So it's completely a new ballgame, what is going to happen. And that's why I like to go a little bit deeper in some things. But I changed my chair, then I can see what I'm doing. Sorry for this little hiccup.
Please, we have chairs enough here.
I made these charts this morning, so it's not so professional as my old professor, Marsha Dickson, but give you an overview. German and European supply chain legislation. The German Act is active from the 1st of Jan 2023. Is there an effect on purchasing practices? I think absolutely yes. And what is the role of social compliance certification in this? Because I represent RAP, and I like to introduce you quickly with 3 sheets. Who does not know RAP, who we are. Oh, first about myself, what Matthijs already said, I'm Dutch, but I'm living in Germany. I'm in sourcing and procurement for 30 years. I bought for sure more than 1 billion euros from Turkish suppliers over all the years, and I'm representing RAP since 6 years in Europe. Who is RAP? RAP is Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production. That's our full name. We are the world's largest independent factory-based program, focused on apparel, footwear, and soon products. There is no standard holder in our space who is solely focusing on this industry. And we are fully factory-based, meaning we don't have members. We are objective. We are non-profit. We are a team of global experts. We have offices around the world. And what we basically do, we inspect and certify factories if their social compliance standards do meet our 12 principles. We work with a lot of associations around the world, and the biggest is probably the AAFA in the United States. Looking at RAP, we certify 3,200 factories currently worldwide, ranked from China to Mexico. That's our top 10. Turkey is maybe 9 or 8. No, I don't think so completely, but that might change in the near future. We cover almost 3 million workers, and that's actually how we measure ourselves if we do a good job. That's actually why we do this job as a non-profit organization, and we are active in 40 countries worldwide. Let's go to this Act on Corporate Due Diligence Supply Chains, this new legislation coming up in Germany. Due diligence is always a little bit a difficult term for me as a Dutch guy, but it's not meaning anything less or more than taking steps that you avoid problems in your supply chain coming up. What kind of problems do we think about, or is the legislation in Germany thinking about? That are all the obvious points we all know as manufacturers. That's child labor, that's forced labor, occupational health and safety, all these issues which you know from BSCI or Fair Wear of whatever standard holder are covered by this legislation. At the right-hand side, I put the website where you can find it. There are 23 pages in German, but also in English, and it's very understandable to read it. What are the obligations under this legislation? If we look at the scope, because this is legislation in Germany, that's meaning companies headquartered in Germany or having a branch organization in Germany, they are under this legislation. The 1st of January, it's starting for all companies with 3,000 employees. That sounds quite a lot, but I think a lot of retailers, including their staff from stores, they easily have these 3,000 employees, and also the big guys, the big brands. And the year after, in 2024, the ceiling is lowered to 1,000 employees. The interesting thing is, of course, that an authority in Germany called the BAFA, the Federal Office for Economic Affairs and Export Control, is really checking what these companies are doing. They need to give a reporting about their activities. So that's quite different from different legislation we have seen so far. BAFA is having access to documentation. If they want, they have access to company premises. They can collect evidence, and they even can issue fines. And fines can go up in Germany up to 8 million euro, or 2% of the turnover of a company. So this is quite different than what we have seen before. okay, we are in Turkey here, we are manufacturing in this country. How does this affect a manufacturer in Turkey? The legislation is far away. Not exactly, because it's a supply chain legislation. It's about the actions of enterprises in its own business areas in Germany, but also the actions of direct suppliers and the action of indirect suppliers. And the legislation is there to avoid that German companies can make a huge profit over the backs of workers in developing countries. So the focus is pretty much not on what is happening in companies in Germany, but what is happening in suppliers in the supply chain. And that can be tier 1 sewing, but that's also tier 2 textile production. So if you want or not, as a manufacturer in Turkey, if your product is finishing up at a German company, you are part of this supply chain, and sooner or later, your buyers will ask for reporting for activities that you are working along the lines of this legislation. It's very simple. If you even sell to an importer in France or in the Netherlands, and this importer is supplying into, I don't know, Kik or whatever German retailer, then all of a sudden you become part of this legislation, and they have the obligation to see what is happening in your manufacturing. What can you do yourself as a factory? There are, of course, a number of social standards. It's, by the way, not only about social standards, it's also about environmental standards. I saw GOTS here as well, our colleagues, with a stronger focus on product contents than we are. We are all about social compliance. But what you can do yourself as a factory is making sure you get certified. Certified for social compliance, environmental compliance. The German government has installed a META label. That's meaning they recognize existing standards, and RAP is one of them. And this green button, or in German, grüner Knopf, if your buyer is having a green button certification, and you are feeding him with a social compliance certification of RAP, the BAFA, the authority in Germany, can tick the box and say that part is fulfilled for our legislation. So you can play an active role yourself to see what is the legislation in Germany, and what can I do to align actually with my factory to become a supplier of choice for German retailers and brands. Yeah, but Matthijs, this is German legislation. We all know we have the UK Modern Slavery Act. France is having legislation. I think even Switzerland on a very low level is having legislation. The Netherlands is having a forced labor law. And this is getting really too much. And the EU actually is very active to say, yeah, we don't want all nations have their own legislation. We want to cover this in Europe with a European legislation. And there is already a draft Corporate Sustainability Act that's in the works. It's going further than the German version currently. But of course, it will be diluted down the lines, but it's expected that maybe in 2 years we have an EU law. And let's see where it's going. We see even New York in the United States is talking about and considering about laws. So this is absolutely a development, a North Star we can't ignore, I think. And I'm always positive. I think it's very good to get a level playing field. And for sure, for the Turkish manufacturers, you are so close to the sales markets in the UK, in Germany. You partly speak the language, very close culture-wise. You understand what the consumer needs. So I think if the level playing field is there, and not one country or one area in the world can be substantially cheaper because they are not obeying these laws. So I'm very positive if manufacturers start to get active and understand what is necessary to do.
Okay, great, thanks. It's good to understand about this legislation that is going to affect seriously most of the garment buyers in Europe, and is already starting to do that in some countries, and obviously manufacturers are therefore affected. But I have one follow-up question. I've heard from you, and I fully understand that, you know, certification is one way to get prepared, but do you think the other way around something will also change? Do you think the legislation will actually force buyers, brands and retailers, to improve the way they purchase, to improve the way they buy? Will it have that effect?
I think so, but we need to understand legislation is probably in larger companies on a strategic level. It's a macro thing, it's a legal thing. If we talk about purchasing practices, better buying, that's more on an operational level, and also the ethical question, do I do things right? What is the impact for manufacturers? So I think these two things will go hand in hand. And I see also a better buying and other options as absolutely tools for companies to become active and to work actively on improving the supply chain. And I'm a strong believer. I'm sometimes a buyer myself as well. If you understand what is the impact of your decision, you have a different conversation with your factory, and you can take decisions differently with a better impact. And also in this light, enabling factories to work compliant. Because we see the craziest things still today, Matthijs. And because I'm sitting at the other side of the table as well. And in many cases, if it's about cancellations, about delays, late payments and whatever, a lot of things you can do better if you understand your factory better. So the feedback via a better buying, I think that's is having a very high value. Because if you are a buyer and you're traveling, you talk about prices, about quality, delivery times, that's your agenda. You're not going to ask the CSR manager of a factory, how are we actually doing? And what we do, what is the impact for you? That's not on a buying agenda. So this feedback is, I think, very, very important, and that can support even boards in companies to do things differently with a better impact.
Okay, great. So knowing that, and I would like to turn to Marsha again, that transparency is so important, because it can change that mindset, and maybe also create a little bit more of an incentive to improve those purchasing practices, because through transparency it becomes also more visible to the wider world how brands are acting on this. The question that I would like to ask is, how can we get more of that? How can we get more transparency? How can we accelerate the growth of making those purchasing practices more transparent to the world?
It's interesting because, oh, hello.
Ta-da!
It's interesting because when we started Better Buying, we actually envisioned that we would have scorecards of companies displayed on our website. And we pulled back from that level of transparency because the suppliers that were participating didn't want to do that. And, you know, I think they felt like the transparency that gained between them and their customer was the most important, and to expose it publicly could have some bad consequences. If, you know, their customer is poorly rated, then their business tanks, then that directly impacts the supplier. But so we're really focused right now, at least, on increasing the transparency between buyers and their suppliers about that business and the consequences of that business. So I think there's a couple things I want to talk about in terms of accelerating change. And the first has to do with really deepening the understanding about the value of data for creating changes and starting that change process. Because, you know, I know all of you are very busy. I'm surprised this many of you are still sitting here trying to run your businesses. And we do have suppliers sometimes say, we're just too busy to fill out a survey, it's a waste of our time. But I want to tell you that that data is making a difference with the companies who are being rated, because what we have seen is that when a large number of suppliers point out and report the same issue, which they do often, the buyer's perception of that issue changes it from a complaint of one or two suppliers to a systemic issue that they need to change. And another thing that happens is that data helps the supplier advocate in the company. You know they're out there, the ones that the merchants say, whose side are you on anyway? They're trying to advance things in the company, and data helps them do that. That helps them argue their case for change inside the company. The other thing is data gathered on an ongoing basis shows the buyer that whether things that it's trying, maybe it's implemented a training course to 2,000 or 3,000 people in their company. Did that work? Are their purchasing practices changing as a result of that? And so they're able to track their own continuous improvement and make tweaks to what they're trying to do to improve. They also can use the data to demonstrate accountability to stakeholders, and even though there's not a legal requirement, there are stakeholders asking for our data now and asking customers, your customers, to share that. And then, to the suppliers and the industry associations, recalling what you heard about Turkey earlier, can't you use that data to challenge your buyers who are sourcing from your company to have better practices? And I think the second thing that's really related to understanding the value of data is getting more supplier participation. And where is that QR code? I hope you grabbed it earlier, because I did check.
I switched my seat.
I did check how many ratings we had submitted already. So I'll know, I can't get it to go, but I'll know how many submitted ratings from today. But the more of you that participate, the better the data, the more valid the results, the more useful everybody finds it, the more solutions are posed, from your own ideas about how customers could do better. And so we need vast participation. The other thing is, companies subscribe with us, and sometimes they come to us, from a variety of different ways and realizations that they want our data. But sometimes they are rated by suppliers, and we don't have enough to give them data, but they say, oh, whoa, we were rated, can we see a report? Well, we need your participation to do that. So those are two related things. Really understand that data is valuable and it's being used to create change, and to participate in our survey.
Great, thanks Marsha. That's really clear. Well, actually we now know definitely that we cannot get the connection with John Thorbeck. I'm very sorry. That happens sometimes. Sometimes technology lets us down. I can only tell you what I was going to ask him, but I cannot give his answer because he's the expert. But what we wanted to do, and I want to share that with you, is to look at purchasing practices from another angle, and that is really the business model angle. Because another way in which purchasing practices can be improved is if there is simply a better functioning business model that creates more margin, and that margin is then actually shared, in a fair way. And this comes from the realization that buyers squeeze suppliers because they need to compensate for the costs of big inventories and big discounts. And I think this is very much in line with the excellent presentation by Browseware, or by the lady representing Browseware. So productivity for buyers and suppliers can improve if less money is wasted, really, by running an inefficient system, because supply and demand are not sufficiently connected. And that is what he was going to talk about. And he is actually carrying out research for the International Trade Center, for the ITC, running mock figures as if in an other business model, a buyer and a supplier were actually doing business, and running those figures to see how that bigger margin can be created. And it depends, of course, on the data that you have on consumer demand, which you can use to improve the forecast. And technology in the sense of digitalization is very much involved there. So we really wanted to show 3 different ways in which purchasing practices can be approached. Legislation, forcing, transparency created, and learning about purchasing practice, how that works in practice, how it can be improved, and business models is another approach. But we'll surely give you more information we get from John. Then I'm going to wrap up because it's time for a coffee break, but not before a final question, starting with Gerwin. Is there anything before we stop that you feel you haven't said? Brief statement.
The thing is that everybody in Turkey can contact me. My email address is at the website. If anyone is having a question about legislation and certification, I'm happy to answer. And anyhow, we as RAP will get more active in Turkey with our monitoring partners like TUV Rhineland to reach out to factories and to provide support how to align with legislation. That you have more sales force to important markets for the Turkey sourcing field, Germany and also UK.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, data is your voice. Your voice is heard with our data. So when you submit data to us, we are able to raise up those challenges, and really better purchasing practices is better buying and better business. And so I don't know why we wouldn't want to work on that together. Thank you.
Great, better buying, better business. I like that to end. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz değerli konuklarımıza. Hediyeleri için arkadaşlarımızı sahneye davet ediyorum. Thank you for joining us and for your presence anyway. Ben hediyeleri takdim etmek üzere değerli Sayın Cem Altan'ı sahneye davet edeyim. Buyurun. Lütfen bir alkış rica edelim konuklarımıza.